Welcome to the 2016 Trans Art Festival presented by Unity Coalition. We're thrilled to be hosted today by the Miami Beach Community Church, by Reverend Hunter Thompson and the congregation, of which I am proud to be part of. My name is Herb Sosa. I'm the director of Unity Coalition. And Unity Coalition works with the Latino, Hispanic, LGBT communities of South Florida since 2002, educating, leading, empowering, just to make things a level playing field for everybody. And we do a variety of programming throughout the year, but one of the things that we're very proud of is our second annual Trans Art Series. And I'd like to hand it over to the creator, the visionary, and the force behind Trans Art and have her tell you a little bit about Trans Art, and then I will introduce the panel. The lovely Aryah Lester, director of Trans Miami, board member of Unity Coalition, and the list goes on of her accolades. So,
all right.
Round of applause to Herb Sosa with yes, I had the vision, and this is beyond what I envisioned, but he's the hands and the feet behind making it happen. So
all right.
Vision kind of got lost from me. And in part it had to do with the environment that I lived under in my family. Specifically when it came to religious views and my family's principles that often fought and battled with who I knew and felt I was in my body, who I identified as a writer. Today, Aryah, that's my name.
I thought you said writer.
And I am a writer, but yeah, as me. And my vision kind of blurred for years, for a long time. Through the last recent years, I see that vision becoming a bit more clearer. I see the colors starting to come back from the grays and the blacks and the darkness. And I hope that today, and through all of the other ways of educating the public, educating ourselves, educating even those of us who think that we kind of know it all already, to make the vision brighter for other people. There's a lot of religious context when it comes to a lot of negativity that we deal with today in the transgender community. But we need to realize that faith and religion, the truth of religion, the truth of faith is not what it makes you feel, but in what your life makes other people feel around you. And that's the context of what we're bringing today. I have seen my vision. I have had my vision blurred, and for a time I was blind. But today, we're all going to see in color, and we're all going to see in humor.
Aryah will be co-chairing, co-running, if you will, this event today with questions. She'll be joined by the equally amazing Nels Ocampo. I'm afraid for the three of you because Nels is on his game today and a very, very knowledgeable individual. So I asked him to be easy on him. I'm thrilled to have. I have to say, before I even finish typing, please help me do this. You always stand tall and say, I'm there, what time? So I appreciate that on a personal level and professionally. I'd like to welcome Rabbi Greengrass with Temple Beth. This year we're thrilled that Trans Art has crossed the invisible boundary of Dade and Broward County, and we are now in Wilton Manors as well. So our programming in Wilton Manors starts next week. And we're thrilled to have Reverend Atwell from she's the Minister of Connections. I had to read that.
Minister of Connections.
Sunshine Cathedral. Sunshine Cathedral.
pleasure. Thank you.
And of course, the man of the hour,
Man of
Reverend
the
Dr.
whole
Thompson,
day.
of which we are all very, very proud, and he leads us and guides us and holds our hand through good and difficult times, in which we certainly have had many and will have others in the future. And we thank you for your leadership. Dr. Thompson of the sorry. Would you like to each say something about your places of worship or add anything, or you just want to jump into it?
I think you covered it.
I think we're good.
Well, during the questions,
Yes.
Absolutely, sure.
and expound further. All right, so the first question I'd like to ask is, how does your faith answer the question, is gender relevant to God? And if so, how does that explain ancient society versus our society today? Is gender relevant for, okay, let me go further into that.
I'm on it.
Is the gender of God important in your religious faiths?
Oh, wait, that's a completely different question.
Well,
But I like it though.
Which one would you like to answer?
That's
Yeah.
the first one. Okay, I'll start. How does your faith answer the question, is gender relevant to God?
Okay, there you go. Go ahead, Rachel.
She knows, Rachel always knows the answer.
Well, actually, I mean, so in the creation story, when God creates the first human being, we all think we know this story. And God creates this being out of the earth, breathes life into the being, and it says male and female, God created them. It's in the singular, and then all of a sudden it refers to the plural. And then we move, you turn the page literally if you're reading from our translation, you turn the page and once again creation is starting all over again. And we see our creation on the sixth day. And so it leaves this gaping hole. And what Rabbinic Judaism does is tries to fill in that hole. So how was it that we had one being that was male and female, and then all of a sudden we have a separate being who was lonely and needs Eve? And so when you talk about how does God view gender, there's an understanding in Judaism that God intended us to be perfect beings, and these perfect beings were both male and female. They were androgynous, they were intersexed, they were both. And it was only through our loneliness that God took not a rib, but in the Hebrew, the side. So pulled man apart. And we have this understanding then that when we're denying any aspect of who we are, that we are actually being pulled apart. So in rabbinic understanding, the ideal being was androgynous and intersex. And in fact, the Talmud recognizes 6 different gender expressions. And it's only later, as Judaism evolved alongside Christianity, that we came to this kind of binary understanding, which is so dominant today.
Thank you very much.
Wow.
Reverend Hunter, would you say that, and now to follow up on that question, would you say that because of the teachings that we have in Judaism that gave to the rise of the whole passage where Jesus in Matthew says, for this, God made male and female, the two becoming one. Do you think that has any correlation to what Rabbi Rachel said?
I think all the texts are related, and the word today is fluidity. And so we have an ancient understanding which comes from the creation story, which continues to evolve and be fluid as people begin to understand their relationship with God. And I think that over time, pretty much everybody in faith traditions understands that God is beyond gender. I mean, we live in a world where binary understandings seem to be important, but in God's economy, not so much. And I think Jesus Christ points the way. I think later Paul will point the way to this idea that though we seem to be limiting ourselves, God is limitless. And so when we connect to God's eternal spirit, we have to leave the labels that separate us from the divine. And that is beyond gender, and it is all genders. And so these are all expressions of God's purpose and God's intent. And I think that Christ tries to point to that, even though he lives, he worshiped and he taught in a world that was really stuck in a very rigid binary model. And he's trying in some ways to say, think outside, literally, think outside of the box. Look at something beyond this. And when you look at that, you're getting closer to God.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, going to, how does that explain ancient society versus our society today? If you just said that males and females have a strict, rigid role in today's society, do you think it really hasn't changed all that much from the ancient society? Reverend Ann?
Yeah. There obviously have been some changes. There would have to be. In ancient times, people were trying to survive. They were trying to survive. And what mattered probably was strength, which often men have. Women may not have so much. Women were there to raise the families. They were there to keep the house, to raise the children. And when the husband died, the woman had to find somebody else to be married to, had to go live with a son, a brother. There had to be somebody male in that family in order for the woman to survive. We don't see that so much today because our society has changed. But is that binary still there? Do we still identify so much as male and female? Yes, we do. And part of me thinks that that's an issue with a need for certainty. We have to have very specific definitions. Our society is very black and white. It has to be this way or it has to be this way. And anything out of that ordinary, out of those binaries, is a little upsetting. It's a little disturbing. Did it exist in ancient times? Absolutely. Do we know about it? Probably not. But I think that where we are today is people stepping out of those binaries, realizing that, as Pastor Thompson said, that God is omnipotent and omnipresent and has no gender. And as people embrace that and accept that and relish that in their lives, I think more and more people will be open to different gender understandings.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Please.
I like to, there's a couple of points that kind of pop out at me in listening to you all. One is a rigid society and adopting certain principles. That rigidness in of itself is kind of fluid when you look at the whole timeline of human history. We have these rigid principles, but what those are based upon is something that changes throughout the generations. And it seems that even religion and spirituality is something that has a fluidity, that aligns itself kind of on the polar end of a rigid society, and then having, spirituality on the side. Would you like to comment, any of you, on that topic?
Sure. We have an understanding that the moment at Mount Sinai of God's revelation, that everybody was there. And so with that understanding, we believe that while prophecy is ended, that all of us are continually experiencing Sinai, and the eyes that we bring to the world, if we can view them through God's eyes. And so it allows us to continue to evolve and to evolve our understanding, because we believe that God's word is relevant to everything. And so as something new is brought into the world, this too is from God. We actually, when we bless our bread, we say, who brings bread from the earth, right? obviously, bread is not brought from the earth. It takes a lot of work to go from the wheat to creating bread. But we say this too is a product of God. And so even as we eat, we say we give thanks to God, and we look at this as an expression of God. So when something new is in the world, then we still need to relate to that. And we still have the opportunity to elevate experiences to holy experiences, however they are.
Okay, I'm going to keep going here. Going back to the creation story, because I think that's very important. That's where majority of religious people that oppose your view stand firmly on and say, look, it was just Adam and Eve. Something I'd like to point out, when I did my studies, well, 7 years of it, and I'm 31, I know it's hard to believe. I actually found a passage that talked about how, okay, the creation story first began. God brings the animals for Adam, to name. Then in the next few passages it says, but among the animals there was no real suitable helpmate to be found. I asked myself, God, why did you just, you knew there was no suitable helpmate. Why would you even bring animals into the picture to have them select and choose, right? Then the next, you turn the page, as the Reverend says, and then you get a whole nother story. Now, from what I was told by a rabbi teacher is that you get one scribe, the one scribe begins to write, and after that another scribe comes in and begins to write his other portion of this. So you have two different readings that come from somewhat the same narratives, but because it's two different writers, two different passages.
Right, it's the oral tradition.
Oral
right.
tradition being passed down. So my question is this. Because you have that story there, how do you, oppose, or what can you give to point out and to oppose somebody that says, well, a suitable helpmate must be a female for a male, and a male for a female? Or do you think that it just pertains to Adam, to the first human being?
That's a good question.
What's
do you
the
want?
scripture?
Okay.
Well,
In the Genesis. Okay.
She's talking about.
Chapter 2.
He's talking about
Two,
Genesis,
there's 1 and 2,
chapter
and there's
1,
one
and
from
then
Yeah.
2
Yeah,
is
right.
like a different.
One
Actually,
and a half to
Genesis-
2 and the rest 16.
Right.
I don't recall the thing about the animals being created and there wasn't a good helpmate.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it
there
wasn't
was-
a suitable helpmate among them. If God knew that they
God
would
said it's not good for
automatically
man to be alone.
Alone.
We can
not
read.
be, a suitable helpmate
Is that before Eve or after Eve?
that was
Before Eve.
So this is where the whole two different
And we have this-
narratives begin to take
Yeah,
place.
We have a whole story of another
So
woman
now,
before Eve.
that, what I'm
so-
Yeah,
asking
Noah.
is,
Yeah,
if
I've read all
God
about
says,
Noah.
this is Adam's suitable helpmate, okay? Meaning
God bless
Eve
them,
was
so
brought
much
out,
to be
or his
fulfilled in Christ.
opposite, or his side, who was formed from him and not created from the earth, okay, as was Adam.
Here.
Adam was formed from the earth. And God breathed the breaths of life into Adam, into the first human being. So how is, from your perspective, how do you take someone and say, okay, that individual's suitable helpmate is this individual because of gender? Because God is saying, Adam, this is, the person that I made. Would you believe that it could be that Eve specifically was brought for a purpose to bring creation about, to bring life, and so therefore that's why God chose specifically Eve? For example, I could have my suitable helpmate that has nothing to do with gender and has to do with maybe my purpose in life. Do you feel that maybe that's really what that teaching was brought in, or that
You want
narrative?
to take that or shall I?
Actually, I'm a little concerned that I might set some heads spinning
Cool.
if I answer that.
Let's do it.
With my understanding. My understanding, and it probably isn't going to shock too many people, but my understanding of those creation stories is that they are myths. They are tales that someone created in order to explain how we landed here. How are we here? How are we here on this
And
earth?
that's a point that is a majority of scholars, biblical scholars that actually have studied the scriptures. They don't take those passages as actual, this is how creation began. They're kind of pointing you towards what could have possibly, or how it could have, everything that came to be.
Right, but I also don't want to minimize the fact that for a number of people, they are absolutely, it is the truth, and this is the way that it is. I'm not truly sure how I would answer that. If somebody is just determined that this God created Adam and Eve, and this is the way that it's going to be, I'm not really sure that you're going to be able to change anybody's minds. I think that what we can do is just live our lives authentically and explain to people, if they're willing to listen, that these stories are myths. Every major religion and ancient texts have wonderful, beautiful creation stories, and they look very similar to what we have in Genesis. If you want to hold them dear as this is it, this is how it happened, that's... Yeah, exactly, thank you. The literal translation. Probably what I say isn't going to change your mind in a very quick soundbite, but we can honor and agree to disagree.
I'd like to open it up.
Sure, sure.
Can I have a stab?
Yeah,
at it?
please, of course, Rachel. Yeah, I
I
don't.
want to swing at that pitch too.
I do want to say that what we learn in the Genesis story, I think that we focus too much on Adam and Eve and the roles that they play and the language that is used there. I think what's more important is that what God said, which is that it is bad for man to be alone. And seeking to find someone who will be your true partner in life. And I think that when we look for relationships, that's what's most important. In our faith, I'm sure, as well I know with the Christian faith, that we don't read Genesis by itself. We bring the entire context of what we deem to be holy. So for us, that's the entire Hebrew Bible, as well as rabbinic interpretation, as well as Kabbalah. And within that, we see very different understandings of finding that person. And we see, I mean, in the Zohar, there's this really fascinating story where the Zohar, it's a Kabbalistic book, so it's
Another sacred text.
another sacred text within the Jewish faith, which you're not supposed to study till you're 40, so technically I shouldn't have read any of it.
Oh my goodness.
But there's this really fantastic text where a man is frustrated because he can't have children with his wife, and the rabbi, when he goes to it, says, well, that's because she has the soul of a man, and she's not meant to be with you. And so it's just really interesting that we see, even in that context, that we understand that there is more than gender, which determines who you're supposed to be with. It is truly your soulmate.
That's wonderful.
The Zohar. It is dangerous to study out of context.
Well, we'll have Reverend Thompson give his piece, and then we'll have you too.
I want to reiterate, when I talk to children about Genesis, I begin with this simple statement. How do you know where you came from? And invariably they go, well, we gather around and there's these wonderful stories that are told, and my mom told me about, our family and our uncles and our aunts and our grandfathers and grandmothers, and oh, we came from this place and we lived over here and we did these things. And I said, that's Genesis.
Yeah.
Somebody asked the question, where did we come from? How did we come to be? And it wasn't ever intended to be some, socio-political response. It was never intended to be some scientific explanation. It's a story of how we happen to be. And when you tell the story of your life, you don't ever include every relative, every event, every feeling, every nuance. It's impossible. So you speak in sort of broad generalizations, and you hit the high points that come to your mind. And that's Genesis. It was never intended to cover every possible understanding of human expression. It's just a story. And to get locked into that story is to discount the central theme of Genesis. God is the life giver. God is the innovative moving force that drives all of creation. God did not create Eve simply to produce children. God could have produced as many children as God chose to produce. So to limit anybody into these gender-specific roles is absurd. But that's what's happened. because people get locked in this literal interpretation instead of accepting Genesis as this wonderful, amazing, open story where we can connect to it, because your story is their story. And I think each generation should go to those sacred texts and go, tell me the story of how we came to be with God. And our story is just as amazing and wonderful as theirs.
Passion Hunter, modern day religion. They took from the books of Genesis, at the beginning there was a first wife that Adam had. Her name was Lilith. But I saw this in the TVN channel, but she wanted dominion over Adam, so she was cast into the lake of fire by God. So then God created Eve, and that's how that came about.
So Lilith is so as I said in
There you go.
chapter 1 of Genesis, we have these two. So this is a different interpretation.
Yes, they took those.
So they're saying that
things out.
yes. So there's a rabbinic. There's another. We live in a world let me just time out.
Yeah, thank you.
We have a lot in Judaism. We are. The more educated you become within the faith, the more comfortable you are living with multiple realities. So we have different understandings, and they all give us different perspectives of getting close to God. That being said, we have a second interpretation of what that meant, that we have these two creation stories, and one is that, in fact, Adam had a wife prior to Eve, and her name was Lilith, and their fight that they have is because Lilith wants to be on top during sex. And she actually can't, she gets very upset with him. She says the name of God, and she leaves. She flies off, and there are 3 angels who come and try and bring her back, and she says, I don't care what you do to me, I'm not going back to Adam. And they say 1,000 of your children are going to die every day. And she said, that's fine, and I'm going to take Adam's babies with whoever he has children with. And so this is where Lilith becomes a demon. And actually one of the names for demons in Hebrew is Lilith, which is obviously it's her name. So she's become, she was a demon in the rabbinic mind, and they actually said that whenever a man had wet dreams, that was Lilith visiting them in the evening, and that she would, the red bundles that people wear, it's to protect you against Lilith, and there's actually crystals that have the names of the 3 angels on it that we use for babies. All of this, by the way, was gotten rid of by rational Judaism, by the Haskalah. But there is this, within, I think, every faith movement, a branch that really believes in angelology and demonology, and so that's where that story comes
They
from.
say that she happens to be, Rabbi Rachel. They say that she also happens to be the wife of Lucifer.
Right, so Lucifer is not within the Jewish faith.
Yeah, that's
We're
later.
lucky we don't have him. But we do. Lilith is actually, for feminist Jews, become a very popular figure, and in fact, there was a Jewish feminist magazine called Lilith. So she's become a positive figure,
An icon.
for those of us who, I guess, like to be on top. All right.
There you go, I like it.
Gina has a question.
And so there you go.
I don't think it's so much a question, but I would like for you to address it as clergy and someone, who is our special guest, who is a transgender. I've come from a very Christian background since 9, and I was thinking when y'all were talking about creation, how it was a story, that would have all been well and good if we all came up in the perfect world that God had planned for us before Adam and Eve partook of the one thing that they were committed the first sin, which sort of null and voided that perfect world that God had planned for us. And then he destroys the world by water, okay? So it's like we get another chance. I think of it from God's perspective at times, because I like to think I'm educated enough to know that God must be one frustrated God. That he just, no matter how many times, how many chances he gives us to get it right, and just love one another, no matter what we are, no matter what we profess to be, or what gender, or who we love, because sometimes we can't help who you love. I just think God must be really frustrated at times. I thought of it last night when he brought this over. He must really be angry, because Pastor was talking this week how slow to anger God is at us. But at times he must get really angry. So I'm thinking zaps into places. Zaps. I think of that God that does. He's slow to anger, but you keep on, and he's gonna fight back. And so, address that.
I guess the whole idea comes back to the God evolving in some form of way. Now we have a God that is compassionate, loving, and all merciful, all just, very wonderful God. And in ancient times, they viewed God as, it was Hashem, this is the creator, he's going to destroy you, you've done this, and I'm going to send a plague, and I'm going to send this. And it goes back to what I firmly hold to as narratives, narrative stories, because if you're going to punish an entire generation upon generation for the sins of your father, so to speak, or your mother, that would be somewhat unjust of God to continue doing throughout further generation. You punish whoever it was that committed a crime, right? That is what a just, God does. Not continue to punish throughout the generation. So this is why I firmly hold to a belief. God's not really frustrated. I think God surpasses that whole level of frustration, and just honestly, truly does love us. Unconditional, which means you mess up, you've done really horrible things. I think it's more God searching your heart and knowing what you are, who you are, and what your motives are. And I think that it goes further that way than really, a storm coming, or got hit by an earthquake, God's mad, this and that, God's mad over there. I don't think it has nothing to do with that. It's more so, we live unfortunately in a world that's being polluted and stuff like that, and it's kind of our doing. And I guess you could say God could be frustrated at that, but we do have the ability to change and to actually bring, beauty, bring goodness, bring life to the world. If we choose to, kind of open ourselves to that level of understanding that God has reached probably eons ago. So, I don't know if you guys want to add it.
A couple of real quick comments, and hopefully they'll echo in. I think this idea of the judging, the condemning God that is quick to anger, where punishment is meted out from generation to generation, where sins can't be forgiven, and the slightest deed results in damnation, and in many cases in the Old Testament, death. I think that understanding of God, first off, does a grand disservice to God, but it also separates people from the God of mercy and grace and love. And I think when you are being oppressed because you have differences, whether it might be transgendered or race or culture or language, or in some cases poverty and education, wherever there's some difference, and people use the Bible as a weapon to harm you, I think it is so much more difficult not only to overcome and live abundantly where you are, but then you have to overcome this level of what I consider religious abuse, where sacred texts are used to limit, to harm, to oppress, to silence individuals. And so I applaud events like today, where, first off, we're not just talking about an issue, we're celebrating it. And that's important, because this is the expression of God that more people need to hear, that they need to hold. that they need to carry in their hearts. There are too many people that will offer the God of vengeance and justice and judgment as being a just God, but that's just simply not so. And so I thank the organizers of this event, at least for whoever sees this. Perhaps they'll know for at least a moment that they are okay, that they are children of God and God's divine Spirit flows within them. And they don't have to be anything more in order to feel that.
So, in the Talmud, there's an argument amongst the rabbis about what's the most important verse in the Torah. And, of course, it's offered up, what is hateful to you, do not do to any other person, love your neighbor as yourself, all of these. But they finally, the last opinion given, which we assume is the one that wins, is that we were all created from Adam. And the reason that is that none of us, no matter who we are, what our ethnicity, nationality, rich, poor, whatever we were born into, or whatever we create of ourselves, we all came from the same person being, and we all had the divine breath breathed into us. So none of us is better than anyone else. I actually, you said the God of the Old Testament. That's mine. That's my God.
Sorry.
It's okay. I'm not sorry.
I wasn't cracking on that.
But I think that there's a misunderstanding because I think that if we only look at God as love and not as taking tabs on our actions and judging us, then we end up with a shallower faith and we let ourselves off the hook. And that actually is one of the things that really worries me about people who say they're spiritual and not religious, because they feel that they can just have this transcendent experience, but then they're not responsible. And God calls us to a higher purpose, and we have responsibilities, and they are to take care of each other. And within my faith, yes, we have a lot of rules. We have 613 commandments. We only require 7 of everybody else. It's fine. So it demands a lot. And it also doesn't let us off the hook. When we sin against one another, God cannot forgive us for that. We have to make reparations with that person. And so the sins that are in our hearts and that people cannot forgive us for, those we deal with our higher power. But everything else, it has to do with the business of the earth. We say the tachlis of what we're doing. Yeah.
That's kind of what I meant, like, when, what happened in Orlando. You don't think God would be really angry with that?
Oh, of course.
That one person responsible for 49 lives accountable?
Well, that's what I'm saying. So if somebody kills someone, they can't be forgiven. I'm sorry. I know that. I'm not saying that means that you don't aspire and that you don't. But in the Jewish tradition,
angry says that, and I'm sorry, you can't do that anymore.
So, go ahead. In the Jewish tradition, God does not forgive murder.
No, it's not God. I'm not saying God doesn't forgive. I'm saying when we commit a sin against another human being, we have to repair that sin. If you kill somebody, they can't forgive you. Not in this world. I don't know what'll happen in the world to come.
In Judaism, according to that sin, and we're going to go into the subject of sin next,
you can spend your life.
That's have to go between you and God to repair that breach.
We said if you destroy a single life, because we're all from Adam, you've destroyed an entire world.
49?
Yeah. So I'm not saying that somebody who, and neither is Judaism, that if somebody has killed someone, we have different categories for accidental and planned, of course, that they can never be forgiven, but they can't be forgiven by the person who they did the harm against. And so their relationship with God has been breached.
All right, thank you very much. The LGBT. Okay, go ahead, sir.
I just want to share something. I believe, as you guys say, we're all created with the breath of God, and I don't believe God is angry. I believe that God put a breath in that human, that he had a purpose, and if it was to kill 50 people, my perspective and my feeling is that I don't think it's generation to generation to generation that is being condemned. It is generation from generation that we have to teach forgiveness and we have to teach love.
We're talking about the earth being destroyed and the reasons why there are catastrophes and stuff like that. That's all that I meant by that. It has nothing to do with how a person treats another person.
No, I'm saying
No,
like
but I think it does if you're talking about sin.
This
get it.
one
Then go get it.
religion or these people have been suffering, but through their suffering, tribulations are created, words and stories are created, and we all share them.
I think that would go into a whole issue of morality.
But she's bringing up the idea of us being God's hands, right?
Yes.
So that even this horrific thing that happened. So what I would say in response to that is, if you believe that, then you need to be God's hands to make sure that our gun laws change and make sure that something like this doesn't happen again. Because only if the world becomes a better place will these lives not have been taken in vain.
Absolutely, and I don't think it's just about guns, I think it's about our spirits. It could be your own hands of a mother killing your own child. It has nothing to do with guns. It's about each and every one of us.
So the condition of the heart, basically, the condition of the heart has to change.
Your soul.
Yeah, so I
Generation to
have
generation.
You're fine.
a question. Like you've been
Very,
talking
very
about-
different perspectives. That's okay.
Please speak.
Yeah, go.
Okay, go ahead.
I consider myself, I am ordained. I have a master's in divinity. I'm starting my doctorate this fall. I am highly spiritual and not particularly religious. In my understanding, God is love, and whoever lives in God lives in love, and God and love live in them. I don't have an image of an anthropomorphic God. This is mine, totally mine, of a God who zaps or gets angry. I don't have that. What I have and what I see in the work that I do, and this is every day. Sunshine Cathedral has a huge congregation filled with people from the LGBT community. And when they come in and we tell them every single Sunday that whoever they are God's miracle and not God's mistake. Wherever they are in their journey, whatever they've done, they're God's miracle and not God's mistake. Then lives are turned around. I don't really believe in the concept of sin. Sin is a word that has been taken and used against people to really hurt them. It's a power word. We've all missed the mark. We've all done stuff that we shouldn't have done. Every single one of us. And if we can step back and if we can say, you know what, that was really awful. And maybe I hurt you, or maybe I hurt you, and I need to make some amends. That, to me, is a transition. That's a turnaround. Can someone who killed someone ever make amends? Maybe not to the families, maybe not to the people, but we don't know what happens afterwards. We don't know if that little voice of God is there talking to them, anthropomorphizing again, but I really think that we need to make a safe space. I'm trying to think of this really fabulous quote that I heard. Religion is for people trying to avoid hell. Spirituality is for people who've already been there. Religion is for people who are trying to avoid hell. Spirituality is for people who've already been there.
So we find that the topic of love is something that is overarching over our centuries of religion and of spirituality. We even find prior to Abrahamic religions, there was a prevalence of a more female-oriented type of religion that was in the world that, in my opinion, I feel really affected those religions that came right after that. And we see a lot of scripture when it comes to gender And when it comes to even sexuality and those things that are used, we see femininity really being, and the push maybe against femininity or trying for masculinity to take more control, where now we live in a male-dominated society here in America. But like you said with the concepts of Lilith, and like you also said, there is changing beliefs right now in religion that kind of are going on that fluid ocean of how our belief system and what things are changing through the feminist movement, women rights, that I think is taking us to a platform to where now gender issues in of itself is at the forefront when it comes to the good and bad of religion. Would you like to comment a little about that, the modernism of religion? And
that leads me to the following question. Why is there so much negativity from the Abrahamic faiths, from the traditional Abrahamic faiths, about the LGBT community, and why is it sin? And what passages can you kind of throw out that are used against the LGBT community that can you kind of dispute down to, what their literal context means to what it,
Go ahead.
We have, I think, 2 verses that are in the Hebrew Bible that are used against the trans community. The first one is in Deuteronomy. There's a prohibition against cross-dressing. But as I said, you cannot understand the text without looking at the oral tradition that came along with it. And according to our oral Torah and the Talmud, they say that what was prohibited was falsifying a person's identity for the purpose of spying on the other sex. So what do we understand? And and there's a question, because we have a holiday, which is Purim, where people typically cross-dress. The rabbi comes in as Queen Esther, like the man comes in as Esther. Last year I was Mordecai, the year before I was Haman. We cross-dress, and it's fun and festive. And guess what? That's been going on for thousands of years. And so Rashi, who lived in the 12th century, 11th century? How does it work? 1100s.
Yeah.
12th century.
Yeah.
He said that if you're cross-dressing for the purposes of joy, then it is not only permissible, but it's a simcha. It's a good thing to do. And so what do we see? We see that if you're cross-dressing because you're trying to disguise who you are, then it's a bad thing. But if you are taking on a gender expression that is different than the one that society would give you, because that does reveal who you are, or because it does give you joy, then it would be acceptable according to Rabbinic Judaism. So this is a verse that is typically used against the trans community, that with the depth of that, with using rabbinic interpretation and understanding, we can have a more liberal way of looking at it.
Thank you very much.
Do you want to grab one?
Go ahead.
And throw out a verse? Oh.
She had a real quick question.
Go ahead.
Hi, I was just thinking, I'm a transgender woman. I started at 15 years old. My family was very religious. My brother still is, but of course they accept me, they love me. And they always tell me, God loves you. God does not love your sins, right? And of course, I always hear everything I do is a sin. If I have a partner, that's a sin. Everything I do is a sin. And even though I've been comfortable all my life in my body, and then I'm happy and I'm spiritual, and there's always that little something behind. Because I also hear, I don't know the rest to tell me, you could go into church, like I visit this church, it's very Christian, and it's very welcoming, And they always say, well, you know, you're welcome the way you are, and God will change you. You know, little by little, like they say.
Bless their hearts.
I've seen on YouTube
In the Southern Baptist
like
way.
That's
all the
right.
trans people have changed. Even from all transition, they have come back. They have changed totally, and they always speak about their spirit, about how God changed them. Even though, you know, I'm very happy with myself, there's always something in the back, like, you know, it makes you think, like, am I doing something bad? You know, am I going to hell like this? You know, it's like, even though I want to believe that I'm, you know, I'm with God and I'm good and spiritual and going to heaven, there's always that. That's all the people tell me, no, you're not.
I believe that's the role of society, just imprints it on your mind.
Absolutely.
Can I take that for a second? Can I take that for a second?
Go ahead.
At the risk of disclosure, by the way, I connect with your story, and I grew up in a very fundamentalist, conservative environment that was incredibly judgmental, and I'm sorry, they made real sharp distinctions between the Old Testament and the New Testament understanding of God.
It's okay to know the difference.
And it wasn't until I went to seminary that my Old Testament professor said, you do realize, Hunter, that it's the same God, right? You get this. And if you don't, I'm going to share some books with you. So anyway, in order to reconcile myself between what I was taught as a child and that kind of conservative theology gets imprinted on you at a very early age. And it's not your choice. Someone literally tells you this is what it means, and this is what you grow up understanding. And so there's that voice that will always remain with you. You will hear those words for the rest of your life. They don't go away. But what does change is the second breath. I have two theologies that operate in parallel within me. I have the first breath, and that is the imprinted theology that I had no control over. That's what I was taught. That's what was hammered into me. And then I have the theology which I know through experience and education, the one where God is not that God. God is more. And so whenever I hear that voice of judgment, I really technically take a very deep breath. And I allow that voice to recede back to where it belongs, to a time and a place where I am no longer present. I am present here. And I know more about God, and I know more about God because of you and others who have lived these extraordinary lives of faith. And that is the God upon which I look, I call, and I worship. And sometimes it takes a conscious choice of literally taking a breath and saying, that voice is not real anymore. And unfortunately, we have too many people of faith that are not allowing themselves the freedom to take that second breath. And I pray they would.
Beautiful.
We have to wrap up a bit, guys, but we'll get to your question. Last final question is, what do you feel your biggest obstacle is? And this is for every single member. So, what do you feel your biggest obstacle is, and how do you feel you'll get there? So possibly, or maybe you won't. Not in a lifetime. What do you feel?
Biggest obstacle regarding
The faith and the trans community or the LGBT community.
the biggest obstacle that I have and that our faith community has is just truly getting word out to the trans community that we are here and that we exist and that we are not only open and affirming, we are welcoming and we are celebrating, and we want to include everybody wherever they are in their faith tradition. We actually, every year we take a look at who is missing at our table. Who is missing? And this year, we realized, actually late last year, the trans community is missing from our congregation. What can we do to reach out to the trans community to let them know that they are welcome, whoever they are, wherever they are in that space? So we have been very intentional this year about reaching out to the trans community, and we are hosting a renaming ceremony in November for everyone to come and receive some type of certificate, have a ceremony with their true name. So that's where we are.
That's beautiful.
That's very nice.
That's beautiful.
I don't know what our biggest obstacle is. I think I've been struggling just personally with my congregation, trying to get a non-gendered bathroom.
Oh wow.
And I think that there's especially within my branch of Judaism, that we're very progressive and we're very accepting. We're also suburban and family-centered, and so it's amazing to me how the powers that be don't know that there are trans people in our congregation, because unless you tell people, they don't necessarily know. And so trying to show them that there's a need that they can't necessarily see. And but I will say that one of the beautiful things about it is that our teens are very passionate about this issue. And already when our teens apply to go to camp or to go on retreats, they already ask, we usually separate by gender for cabins and things like that, and they say, like, where would you feel most accepted? And they ask what pronouns they want to use. And so I really think that we're raising up a generation that's going to teach us, how to be the kind of welcoming space that we claim to be.
That's wonderful. That's great stuff.
I've been struck this whole week as I've thought about this presentation that language has changed dramatically in the last 5 years. Gender binary, which is a prevalent term right now, is a term I didn't read it for the first time until last year. The situation is changing. We live in a time where it's very fluid, and I think our biggest challenge is for communities of faith which don't particularly move very quickly, and sometimes they don't move with much grace or elegance. My biggest challenge is to say it's okay, but let's keep the journey moving forward, because the need is moving forward and understanding is moving forward. And so it's trying to keep faith. My biggest fear is that the transgender community, out of frustration, will just say enough. We can't do this anymore. You can't move fast enough. You can't accept us. You can't understand us. And so therefore we will be over here. And when you finally catch up, come find us. And so our biggest challenge is to keep connected. And I think that's not just about the trans community. I think it's about the LGBT community. I think in some ways it's around economics, it's around culture and race. The church has to do a better job of moving faster, because the world is not going to slow down for it.
That's right.
Aryah, any big obstacle?
I think the biggest obstacle is getting the general public to realize that their faiths, their leaders, their religion, their texts aren't as rigid as they believe it is. Yeah. Even through the lifetimes of all of us here, we have seen changes in the views of certain scriptures when it comes to how you view people of color. And there were scriptures that were pulled out that were used to promote racism. And during our lifetime, we've seen a change in that, a change in the view of that scripture. And the same thing for femininity and the power of women. Within our lifetime, we've seen changes in faith when it comes to that. And so I think that right now, our views on the trans community is in that transition phase as well. When it comes to faith, when it comes to religion, when it comes to spirituality. And it's people like this, organizations and faith centers like where you all are at, that is going to be the catalyst for that change. And that catalyst will go through each one of you that aren't here, to teach love and to teach, the trueness of what our belief, what faith actually is.
Beautiful, thank you.
I'd like to ask each of the three faith leaders here to just give us a statement, a couple of words, a couple of sentences of what being transgender or welcoming, if you will, in your own faith centers means to you today. And we'll kind of close with that.
Okay. There's a story. We tell a lot of stories in our faith. I'm sure in everybody. There was a great rabbi, Rabbi Zusia, and he falls asleep. You know this story?
I do know this story.
Yeah, so
great.
he falls asleep and he dreams that he's at the gates of heaven. And he wakes up, he's so upset, and his disciples are asking him, why are you so upset? Did they ask you, why you weren't more like Abraham, and had perfect faith? And he said, no. And, did they ask you why you weren't like Moses and brought people to the faith? And he said, no. They asked me, Zusia, why weren't you Zusia? And so that's what I want to leave with you, is that God created each of us. We are each different and special, and we serve God best when we are our true selves.
Very good. And I will just say what I said a little while ago to each person here, wherever you are in your journey, you are God's miracle, not God's mistake.
Amen.
And I would just say that we believe that God is beyond gender and all genders. And all people are welcome and respected here. I think in this particular community of faith, we are moving quickly to a time where we honor the divine Spirit of God as it is expressed, as it exists. And that is my hope, that we will continue to do that. And if we do, then I'm not worried about the fluidity or the speed or the change, because it will be indeed a celebration.
Absolutely. And so it is.
I want to present each of you with a very small token of our appreciation to remind you of this wonderful, wonderful changing day today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
There you go. Thank you. You can have a quick round of applause. This is certainly, as we said from the beginning, just the beginning of a dialogue, an ongoing dialogue. Hopefully we'll all come home and be here a little more informed, hopefully a little more peace, and maybe with even more questions. So questions are good.
Questions are good.
So I welcome us to stay around. I'm sure that everyone will be here for one-on-one conversations, but I thank you for joining us today.
It's a real pleasure to meet you.
Thank you, Herb.